And I just want to quickly introduce the next panel. It is a terrific panel. I won't say we've saved the best for last because it's been such an extraordinary day all day, but I will say you won't be disappointed. So let me invite the last panelist to come up on the stage. Jane Nelson, let me put it this way. If corporate social responsibility had a mother, it would be Jane Nelson. Absolutely. Jane has been writing, leading thinking, leading work with companies all over the world for a long time before this topic was so widely known and so popular. And she's been a terrific advocate and supporter and contributor to the thinking around shared value. Next to Jane is Jeff Hollander. He is the founder and former CEO of Seventh Generation, a company that many of you know that makes personal and home products, that has really differentiated itself and gained its competitive edge because of its environmental and social performance and impact. And next to Jeff is Dan Hollander, who is the president and CEO of Interface. Interface is a fascinating company. It is a market company, and they have followed the preachings of one of my personal heroes, Bill McDonough, for many years, to rethink the business model in a way that makes sustainable sense. And you know, every company here, certainly every company that is more than 10 or 20 years old, is operating on a business model before we really knew what sustainability meant, what environmental impact was, what things like shared value meant, what things like selling to the rest of the world's population really meant. And we have the opportunity, and what shared value is really about, is the opportunity to rethink our business models in light of what we know today and recreate our companies in a way that makes sense for the world today. And I think what Dan has done at Interface is a great example of that. So with that, let me turn it over to Jane.
Thanks, Mark.
And welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mark. And good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here as part of this great community and to lead our leadership conversation on, I think, the incredibly important link between delivering outstanding sustainability performance and creating shared value and competitive advantage. And I think it's a link that we've heard again and again throughout the day that is really beginning to gather serious momentum. And it's gathering serious momentum as a result of demographic shifts, of technological breakthroughs, of political and economic changes. It's a link that's gathering momentum because of growing interest from investors, as a result of growing influence from millennial employees and consumers. It's gathering momentum because of some, I think, pretty groundbreaking global agreements that Jim Kim spoke about today, such as the Paris Climate Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. But it's growing momentum, I think, most importantly, and we've heard it again and again throughout the day today, because of outstanding leadership and remarkable leaders at different levels of companies and different types of companies and in different sectors. And that's sort of really what we want to focus on today, is sort of some of the leadership insights and lessons from, as Mark has already said, I mean, to me, you know, two of my sort of heroes in terms of long-standing leadership in this field. You know, and Jeffrey as a sort of a serial sustainability entrepreneur who's you know, built one great company and is in the process of having just co-founded building another great company with his daughter on women's sort of personal care and sexual wellness products. And then Dan is the sort of chairman, president and CEO of Interface, which is the world's largest manufacturer of modular carpet and the inventor of the concept of modular carpet, sort of having taken, as Mark said, a sort of a transformational role within a larger global sort of Fortune 500 company. So two very different types of business leaders, but both of them have been integrating sustainability, social environmental goals and metrics into the heart of their business activities and their business success for over 20 years now, sort of 15, 20 years in both cases. So I think has some great experiences to share. And Jeffrey, I'd like to sort of start with you. You have, in the businesses that you've built, you have embedded sustainability and sort of the concept of shared value right at the heart of your business model from the very outset. And can you say a little bit about how you sort of identified the competitive advantage and how you've done that and built sort of scalable businesses on that premise?
Yeah, I wish it was that straightforward and that thoughtful. I mean, I think we had this very deep-seated belief that business can play a critical, if not the most important role in social and environmental change. And I'll just tell you a story that sort of illustrates what has been a journey. Back in the early 90s, so this is a long time ago, the early 90s, we had got this very exciting thing happened. We got our 7th generation products into a grocery store called Albertsons in Southern California. And we were so excited to be in this big grocery store. And we delivered the products to the store. And lo and behold, the following month, there was a strike at that grocery store. And the workers at the grocery store were on strike because management was taking away their health benefits and they were striking. And so we were, what do? We paid 100% of the health care for our employees. We believed that was right. And now we're selling to a store and making money from a company that's doing something we don't believe in. Now, granted, most companies are not thinking like this, but that's how we were thinking. And we were torn, and we had a tremendous internal debate. Do we take our products and stop selling? Or do we basically say, look, we've got good products. Why should we deprive the customers of the store from the opportunity of buying them? And we came up with a very interesting solution, which to me is sort of the heart of the journey we're on. And what we decided to do was we decided that we were going to continue to sell our products in Albertsons, but we were going to take 100% of the profits from those sales and contribute them to the Workers' Strike Fund to help the workers stay on strike as long as they could to win back their health care. And to me, this is the heart and soul of what 7th Generation is about, which is exploring how, in a very counterintuitive way often, we can find new ways of having a positive impact on these social and environmental issues. And I think that's, in large part, why we were successful, because people felt good about supporting us. They didn't know all the things we were doing, but I think they had a sense that we were out there fighting a good fight for the right things, and that they could feel a little better, a little bit less guilty when they bought our products.
And did you have much success working with the management of Albertsons there? I mean, and how did you we hear about influencing suppliers, but what about working with your customers and the broader ecosystem?
They sort of turned a blind eye to our behavior.
Okay. So,
but we continued to do that. And we then went for a decade refusing to sell to Walmart, and had lots of discussions with them about why we wouldn't sell them our products. So it was a theme that we stuck with.
Yeah, great. So sort of living your values, but also being pragmatic and creative in terms
I think
of
that's
addressing
part of our
challenges.
competitive advantage.
Yeah.
It was a deep sense of authenticity that I think people felt about the brand.
Yeah, but also engaging to move the agenda forward.
Yes.
Yeah. No, great.
Always.
And talk about engagement, Dan. Coming to you. I mean, you're a finance guy, and I think, in fact, when
First
you were
of all, he wasn't a public company back then.
he wasn't a public company. Very good point. Yes, but in fact, apropos you being, I think one of the youngest chief financial officers of a Fortune 500 company. But as a CEO, you've sort of led this internal transformation process. So can you say something about how how you got the support internally to change a large company in terms of its strategy, but also maybe say a word about how you engage with investors as a publicly listed company?
Yeah, well, I would say if you have to go back to our journey. I mean, we were a brown company in a brown industry, and we were totally dependent on oil. It was 90% of our raw material costs. And we had a founder CEO who had this vision in 1994 that we were going to get off oil. I'm the CFO. I've got investors. all of a sudden, and we're just coming out of a recession, and all of a sudden Ray Anderson says to the world that Interface is going to get off oil. As a CFO, I actually thought he had lost his mind, to be honest with you. There, in my mind, there was no way that we could re-engineer the business to get off oil. And Ray's vision was we were going to get off oil, have a zero carbon footprint, and basically he thought carbon was the biggest issue facing society. But when I came to CEO, we were 7 years into that journey. And we had pretty much gotten a lot of success and wins like you, Jeffrey, within your business, in that the employees were engaged in the higher purpose. We had wins in dematerializing the product. Our customers asked us what we're doing about the environment. That's how we got into this. And so when I became the CEO, it was pretty easy to say, okay, let's change the lens on investment. I heard today at lunch, you got to change the ROI. Let's depend on the goodwill of the customers to drive the market share benefits of it. And the biggest thing that we did was we created an innovation pipeline. The best innovations Interface ever had came out of, let's get out of the box. Let's reinvent ourselves and let's get off oil. Let's get to recycled content. If you fast forward 22 years later, I think the biggest issue facing society today is climate change. And I think the biggest issue is how do you reinvent yourself around carbon and climate change as well. Mm-hmm. So that part was pretty easy to get through it. But the hard part was to get through it in 1994 when we came out of recession, for me.
And sort of building on that, how did you engage with your investors, and what pushback did you get? And how did you educate them, or did you not even try?
We didn't. I can tell you a quick story. I know we don't have much time here, but in 1995, we go to our biggest investor conference, and Ray Anderson takes the slide tray, his investment presentation, takes away from me, sits on the table and says to his biggest shareholders, which are about 60 in the room, I'm not going to talk about my company today. I'm going to talk about the environment and Mother Earth's in trouble. And I looked out there at the investors, you could hear a pin drop. And they all thought Ray had lost his mind. And so I said to Ray, why don't you let me handle the investors and you go save the world? So eventually the investors came along. It took a while. We were called the tree-hugging company, the tree-hugging CEO. But eventually they felt like sustainability was a competitive advantage and they got on board. But I think the shared values is going to be a whole different conversation with the investor community as well.
Yeah. And are you beginning to have that conversation? Are either of you, and I know you're not a publicly listed company, but are you seeing shifts in the way investors are addressing this?
I think that the societal part of that conversation is starting to happen, but they're not anywhere near there. What they want to know is what is it going to cost, or what are we going to make off of it?
And it's a huge challenge because we've got an investment community focused on a very short-term result when what we need are long-term visions and long-term solutions, and it's a mismatch. And it is structurally built into our system, where most people don't even own a stock anymore for a day, let alone a couple hours. I mean, there's so much short-term trading. And I think that in order to solve our problems, we have to look at what structurally we have done to our society that will make that challenging, because you can have all the visionary leaders you want, but if we don't change the rules of the game, those rules are going to be our downfall.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on that point, I mean, I'd like to sort of ask people to start sending in questions. We've got time for a few questions, but coming back to the whole thing of the question of the role of leaders and leadership, there are a number of systemic things that have to change. And what do you think business leaders are doing enough? I mean, we talk about the climate agenda. It's going to take a while to make a transition. How do we have a sensible debate about what that transition is going to look like? Equity, as we heard earlier today, is an ongoing issue. What role do you think business leaders should play, in addition to their own companies and their own industry sectors, in engaging in a sort of constructive, collective way around some of these more challenging systemic issues?
I think, when you think about of the 1,400 largest entities in the world, 1,000 of them are companies. Yeah. So companies are bigger than most countries. They're bigger than most NGOs. I mean, they're gigantic. And so I think there's a tremendous responsibility that the leaders of these companies have. And unfortunately, we don't have enough leaders like this gentleman or like Paul Pullman or the kinds of people that are willing to say, I'm going to do something even though I don't know how to do it because it's the right thing to do. And we need the willingness of leaders to embrace goals that they don't know how to get to where they're going and have the willingness to fail, to have the willingness to make those great leaps of faith. And I think that when history is written, it will be the business leaders that are those types of visionaries that will save us from ourselves.
Yeah, and so taking risks both within their own companies and innovation and products and services and business models, but also sort of taking slightly broader risks to be part of a broader conversation.
Yeah, I would also say that the right kind of leaders will really create the business case for shared values.
Yeah.
I mean, I firmly believe that if you don't have that 10 years from now, with the millennials, with the political situation it is today, that your company is not going to be in existence. Mm-hmm. So I think leaders of companies, good guys hanging out, will start figuring out what's the shared value model that works, and how do you actually make it work. I mean, we had no idea how to get off carbon, and we're going to get there. We created Mission Zero. Our carbon footprint's been reduced by 50%. Greenhouse gases are down 92%. Renewable energy is 84%, 91% less than the landfill. But you had to innovate your way into that. And I think today, companies are doing that, and the good guys will hang out and figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I think, going to get more dictated than ever before, because millennials will know you're not doing the right thing. Your employees won't work for you on a higher purpose. And the political landscape is changing around us.
Yeah. And how are you doing sort of the innovation within the company? I mean, how are you inspiring and getting, I think you've got sort of 30,000 or plus sort of employees. I mean, how do you get each person, as we've heard,
we have 4,000.
Great examples today?
I think the biggest thing is that you have, and Jeffrey said it, you got to give them permission to pursue and fail.
Yeah.
If your employees know that you'll invest in their ideas, some of them that are crazy ideas, and you get outside the box, it's very infectious where the employees innovate, and you keep innovating. You bring your suppliers into it. You bring your technical partners into it. And it's this higher purpose that drives a lot of that, but you got to have success in it.
Yeah.
But you got to be willing to fail and learn from it.
Sure. From our perspective, I mean, one of the biggest learnings at Seventh Generation was we created all these wonderful products, but they were what I consider less bad than the alternative.
Yeah.
So recycled, unbleached, bathroom tissue and paper towel, better than the alternative, but they're contributing to the very problems that are challenging our planet. And so when I started Sustain, the goal was to create what we called net positive products. Yeah. Products that in the entire supply chain and life cycle made a positive contribution in each area. Yeah. And we picked a very, very unusual product, which was condoms, because condoms, while they have a very, very low negative footprint, have incredible positive benefits. I mean, talk about climate change. We're helping to slow down climate change by making condoms available so that women can plan smaller families.
Yeah. And at the same time, having great health benefits and, other very
They're
important
fair
aspects
trade.
of condoms. Exactly.
They're vegan. They're not tested on animals. They've got more benefits than we know what to do with.
Great.
I never thought I'd be on stage with a sustainable condom yet.
Carpets and condoms.
You got to be brave.
Great. Well, we do have time for a few, and we've got a number of good questions coming along here. So why don't we start? There's a question for you, Dan. Do your customers sort of start off valuing your sustainability propositions and your shared value proposition, or have you had to do sort of quite an active job at educating them and actually challenging, a bit like Jeffrey was talking about, the customers who are your lifeblood, actually challenging them to think more creatively?
Both, but the journey started where a question was asked by a customer: what is interfacing going to do about the environment? Remember, we're the architecture design firm, and they're very much into what's going on with the environment. And so we started driving that, and we changed, I think, a really brown industry to a very green industry in that. And our customers give us credit for getting into this journey in 1994.
Yeah.
And then everybody got into lead, and everybody got into what's going on with the environment, recycled content, and so forth. But you have to re-educate every day about what's going on around sustainability. But our customers give us the benefit, tremendous goodwill around this position. And they drove us to this point originally.
Yeah, okay. And then, Jeffrey, a question for you, but then it would be good to get your views as well, Dan. Given this challenge with investors and both the short-termism and the lack of many of them integrating social and environmental risks or benefits into their investment strategies, do you think it is going to be the sort of smaller, privately owned entrepreneurial firms that are going to be the real leaders on shared value?
Yeah.
And or, Dan, what's your view on the publicly listed firms?
Well,
how can they?
I don't find the venture capital and private equity and hedge funds that invest in small companies necessarily to be particularly longer term in their thinking.
Like we heard from Dr. B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can afford to let the smaller companies lead the way. I think we need to change the rules of the game, and I think we need to insist, and I think we see more so today than ever before, some of the largest companies on the planet being the biggest innovators and the greatest leaders. So I think that, we have CEOs who are willing to say, if you don't like, look at Tim Cook, said, if you don't like what we're doing with alternative energy, put your money in another company. And I think we need those kinds of brave leaders of the world's biggest companies who can use their success and use their large size to keep investors at bay to a certain extent. And I whether Paul Pullman says I'm not going to get on the phone and do quarterly earnings calls anymore. That's the kind of leadership we need. We're seeing that from big companies, and we just have to pay attention to as I say, the rules of the game to make it easier for them to do the right thing.
And do you want to say a bit more about what those rules of the game would be? Is this sort of like policy incentives?
Well, look. The rules. Let's take long-term capital gains. To make an investment for 12 months and to have that called a long-term capital gain is crazy. We need to incentivize people to make investments over 5, 10, or 20 years, not 12 months. And those things are endemic in the system. We were talking about equity before. I think equity is a critical thing that needs to be infused in this conversation. Why does a relatively wealthy person like me need a tax break on my second mortgage for my second home? There are better ways to spend that money. Why are such wealthy people getting Social Security? We have a system that is creating problems. It's not just companies and it's not just bad leaders. We've created a system that fundamentally often incentivizes the wrong behavior.
So finding... And so it might be an interesting area for the Shared Value Initiative to look at what are some of those sort of policy incentives or policy changes that are needed to actually incentivize creating shared value for the long term. So Dan, do you want to sort of...
I'm not sure I can add to that, but I would say that white spaces is big in this area. I heard that today at lunch. I think you have to find the white spaces. You have to innovate into where you can get growth.
Condoms. That's the way.
There you go. But I really do. I do believe you're going to have to find the business case for shared values. I don't think it can be free. Somebody said that. A couple people said that today.
Yeah.
You got to really find out how you're going to get a return on it. But I do think you have to have the courage to take a longer view than once a quarter. I really do.
Yeah.
And you have to invest in those things that give you long-term growth potential. And I think we're going to find as this thing gets more and more competitive that white space out there is where people are going to compete and grow their business.
Yeah.
It's not going to be fighting over 2-cent margins or 3-cent margins.
Yeah.
It's really is how do you, whoever thought Uber would have changed the world the way they changed the world, right? That's the white space that they play in.
Yeah. So fundamentally
Yes.
changing the
I think you have to
playing
do that.
field.
And in an environment where we need that long-term investment, you look at the huge amounts of money companies are spending buying back their own stock. I don't know if that's something you do, but that money isn't spent on innovation. It isn't spent on workforce development. It's spent artificially pushing up the price of stock. And another practice that I think is a bad practice. I mean, if a company can't find anything better to do with its own capital than to buy its own stock back, I think that's a lack of vision.
You also have activists out there. So if you create a lot of cash on your balance sheet, you're either going to give a dividend or buy the stock back or find something to invest in. So you've got to change the mind of how the investors feel as well if you're a public company.
And that's where I think the question of sort of policy incentives and then the investor side and the same type of leadership that you're both talking about. We need those leaders in the investment community, which, Larry Fink from BlackRock, some of the things he's been saying lately on social environmental
issues. I could have hugged him on that one.
Yeah, no, which is a great example of leadership, and hopefully now they've got to execute what they're saying. We're about to run out of time, but I want to finish with a sort of question to you both about the types of skills that we need for sort of future business leaders, because we heard a lot today about the challenges of operating in silos, the need to think beyond our functional silos, our geographic silos, our sector silos. What types of sort of skills and both mindsets and skill sets are you looking for in people that you're hiring or promoting, and what types of sort of future leaders do we have to be educating? Both within companies and but also within schools and universities.
Well, I think that's a powerful question, actually. We're actually recruiting a lot of millennials.
Yeah.
We're recruiting people that have the cultural fit, people that have a higher purpose, the innovators that you can find, people that can get out of the box and really create value outside the box. But those people are coming out of universities today. And they will be attracted to your company, and they'll come talk to you about they want to work for Interface or your company because they have a higher purpose. They will find you in the marketplace. I think you have to create an environment where they want to come work for you. And we've eliminated the silos. We're going to a very integrated business model, collaboration across it, matrix management. That's how the millennials want to work, is matrix management. They don't want to be put in a box. And we're trying to drive that creativity where they're comfortable being outside the box and being entrepreneurs and so forth.
And on the diversity side, not just gender diversity, but the sort of the cultural diversity that Andrew and others spoke about.
Yes, we're all about diversity of thought.
Yeah.
We're all about cultural diversity as well. We're global. We're very diverse. Half our business is outside the United States, but we love diversity of thought, challenging the status quo. That's one thing we drive for.
And can you give like one or two very, very practical, specific tips for all our friends in the room here? Like, how do you actually encourage that? So it's great to say we're about diversity of thought. What are some of the practical tools? Ability to fail and and to be encouraged to think out of the box. But are there sort of specific things you're doing to incentivize that and encourage that within the company?
I think you have to create a culture that they're comfortable in that. They're comfortable in challenging management or challenging the status quo. I mean, we've had two big product failures that we learned from. One was 100% product failure. We came out with the most sustainable product you could actually ever introduce. 100% failure in that. But we learned from it, and we learned how to make the product later on down the road. Nobody got fired for that. We actually encouraged that. Yeah. So you have to have an environment where they want to participate and they feel safe.
Yeah, great.
And inspired.
Yeah, safe and inspired, and I think that sort of inspirational aspect is key. But then the ability and the permission to implement and to fail if that happens. Jeffrey, what?
Yeah, I would say, on that note, the people that took me to task publicly, I turned into heroes at the company. And I let everyone know that the people that were the courageous enough to challenge me in a public setting would not just be tolerated, but they would become heroes. And in terms of the question about what's the most important skill, I actually think this is something that should be taught to kids in first grade, but we taught everyone at Seventh Generation systems thinking, because we thought that this compartmentalized way in which we are taught to think and behave is the most dangerous thing that affects business, because we don't see the unintended consequences of our actions. So I would say, and I still feel that this discipline has yet to come into its own, it must be taught in all school systems. And if you're going to go into business, you've got to understand systems thinking. So to me, that's the most important underutilized discipline that would, I mean, I think if first graders were taught systems thinking, they would look at the world and they would look at what we're doing and they would say, what are you guys doing? This doesn't make any sense. Because they would see the craziness with which we act, because they can see the connection between all things.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a really great point to finish on. And those of you in the room who haven't read, I don't know if John Kanye is with us, but our colleague at FSG has written a great paper on system leadership with Peter Senge and Hal Hamilton. And I absolutely agree with you. I think this ability to be a systems leader, both individual systems leaders, but then companies to think more systemically, and then it leads very much into collective impact and collective action. And so I think if we have sort of individual systems leaders, institutional systems leaders, and companies engaging with non-traditional allies, and then the type of collective impact, sort of multi-sector systems leaders, is about the only thing that's going to get us to where we need to get. So thank you both very much for being clearly leaders who have both a vision and ability to execute. And to pick up Dr. B's quote earlier, leaders of both value but also sort of successful in integrating sort of shared value right into the heart of your business model. So thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And back to Justin.